Rahul and Mira had been best friends since school. Every weekend they looked for new hiking trails to escape the noise of the city. They both loved the quiet of nature, the sound of leaves moving with the wind, and the feeling of adventure that came with every step into the unknown. That Saturday morning, they started their journey earlier than usual, carrying small backpacks filled with water, sandwiches, and a map that Mira had drawn after studying satellite images online. The forest they planned to explore was far from any village. It was known for its deep valleys, tall pines, and clear streams. The path was peaceful and the air smelled of wet soil after a recent rain. Rahul walked ahead, humming softly while Mira followed, looking around with a mix of curiosity and caution. She was always the careful one, while Rahul liked to take risks. After about 2 hours of hiking, they reached a point where the main trail split into two. One path went down toward a small stream, and the other disappeared between thick trees. Mira checked her map but couldn't find any sign of the second trail. "This one isn't on the map," she said, pointing toward the narrow path that vanished into the darker part of the forest. Rahul's eyes lit up. "That makes it more interesting. Let's see where it goes." Mira frowned slightly. "What if it's dangerous or private land?" "We'll walk for 10 minutes. If it looks unsafe, we'll come back," he said confidently. Reluctantly, Mira agreed. They started walking through the narrow path. The ground was soft with moss, and the air grew colder as sunlight struggled to reach through the thick branches above. The sound of birds faded, replaced by a deep quiet that felt almost too heavy. After a few minutes, Mira noticed something unusual. A wooden sign leaned against a tree trunk, half covered with leaves. She brushed off the dirt and saw faint letters written in red paint. The words were almost gone, but she could read a few. "Circus. Fun show," she called Rahul. "Look at this. What kind of circus would be in the middle of a forest?" Rahul stared at the sign and laughed softly. "Maybe it's from some old event or festival. Let's keep going. Maybe we'll find something interesting." They walked farther, and soon the path turned wider. The smell of wet leaves mixed with something faint and sweet like old candy. The air felt heavier, and a strange silence wrapped around them. The forest that had seemed friendly now felt distant, as if it were holding its breath. Then, between the tall trees, Rahul spotted colors, faded red and white stripes. He took a few steps forward and stopped in surprise. Before them stood a huge tent, its cloth old but still standing. The colors were pale, the ropes thick with vines, and the entrance half open. The tent looked as if it had been forgotten for decades. A wooden board near the entrance had golden letters that had turned brown with age. It said, "Welcome to the Grand Woodland Circus." Mira whispered, "This can't be real. How can a circus be here?" Rahul felt a chill run down his arms. Maybe someone used this place long ago. It looks abandoned. They moved closer. The grass around the tent was flattened in a few places, and there were old crates, metal stands, and a broken wooden cart lying nearby. Rahul looked inside the cart and found faded posters stuck to the bottom. The drawings showed smiling clowns, animals, and people performing tricks. The faces looked cheerful, but the colors had darkened with time, giving them an odd look. Mira stepped carefully near the tent and peeked through a small tear in the cloth. Inside, she saw rows of wooden benches facing a circular stage. A few of the benches were broken and dust floated in the still air. The light was dim, but something caught her eye. A chair placed right in the middle of the ring, as if waiting for someone. "Rahul, come here," she called softly. He walked over and looked inside too. "It looks empty," he said. Just then, a faint sound came from within. It was slow, almost like an old tune being played on a damaged music box. The notes were uneven but clear enough to recognize as circus music. Mira's heart started beating faster. "Did you hear that?" Rahul nodded, his face serious now. "Yes, maybe there's a speaker or something left on. But how can anything work here?" "There's no power," she said. They stood still for a moment, listening. The music grew a little louder, then stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was deep and heavy. Rahul tried to sound calm. It might just be the wind or water hitting metal. Things like that can make sounds. Mira wasn't sure. It didn't sound like that. It sounded real. Rahul took a step toward the entrance. "Let's check it. If it's empty, we'll just take a few pictures and go back." Mira grabbed his arm. "Wait, what if someone's there?" He smiled slightly. "Then we'll say sorry and leave. But we came all this way, and I want to see it." With slow steps, they moved toward the open flap of the tent. The air smelled old, like dust and damp cloth. A few birds flew out from a hole near the top, making Mira jump. Rahul pushed the flap aside and entered carefully, shining his small flashlight inside. The light moved across empty benches, wooden poles, and torn curtains. The place looked frozen in time. On the far side, a big painted sign hung crookedly from the wall. It showed a picture of a smiling ringmaster tipping his hat. The paint had faded, but the figure's eyes seemed strangely lifelike under the flashlight beam. Rahul whispered, "This must have been a real circus, maybe from 50 years ago." They walked slowly around the center ring. The ground was covered in sawdust, dry and dusty. In one corner stood a small box with faded stars painted on it. Rahul knelt to open it, but it was empty except for a broken toy monkey. The toy's eyes were missing and one arm was torn. Mira looked around nervously. "I don't like this place. It feels wrong." Before Rahul could answer, the faint music began again. This time it came from deeper inside the tent. The sound was soft but clear, like an accordion playing a slow tune. Rahul turned his flashlight toward the sound. At the far end, a small curtain moved slightly as if someone was standing behind it. Mira whispered, "Let's go back." Rahul hesitated. His curiosity was stronger than his fear. He took a few steps forward. The floor creaked under his shoes. The curtain moved again. He reached out and pulled it aside quickly. Behind it, there was nothing but an old stage setup. Wooden boxes, a stool, and a rusted cage. The music stopped again. Mira grabbed his hand. "Rahul, please. I don't want to stay here anymore." He looked at her and nodded slowly. "All right. Let's leave. Maybe we can ask someone from the nearby village if they know about this place." They turned toward the exit, but as they walked out, Rahul noticed something on the ground near the door. It was a ticket. The paper was yellowed, but the words were still clear. "Admit 1, Woodland Circus tonight only." He picked it up, staring at the date printed on it. It was from the year 1962. Rahul showed it to Mira. She looked pale. "This place has been empty for more than 60 years. They stood in silence for a moment. The forest outside was quiet again, but the air felt colder than before. As they stepped away from the tent, the soft sound of the circus music began once more, playing from behind them. Neither of them turned back. Rahul and Mira walked quickly away from the circus tent. The trees around them seemed darker than before, and the air was heavy with silence. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Their shoes made soft sounds on the wet leaves, but every step felt louder in the quiet forest. Mira kept glancing behind her as if she expected someone to follow. Rahul looked calm, but his hand was tight around the old ticket he had found. When they finally reached the main trail, Mira stopped to catch her breath. That was not normal. The music, the sign, the ticket from 60 years ago. It doesn't make sense. Rahul looked at the ticket again. The paper was thin and smelled like dust. Maybe it was a prank. Someone could have left speakers there, or maybe it's part of some forgotten place. Mira shook her head. There were no wires, no power, no sign of anyone living there. It felt like the whole place was waiting. Rahul didn't answer. He felt the same, but didn't want to say it out loud. The forest was quiet again, but it was not the peaceful kind of quiet they had known earlier. It was a strange, heavy silence that seemed to listen to their words. They decided to follow the main trail back toward the road. The sun was sinking and the sky turned orange between the trees. They had walked for about half an hour when they noticed something odd. The path that should have led them back to the stream was gone. Instead, it turned toward a set of tall, twisted trees that neither of them remembered passing before. Mira frowned. "I think we took a wrong turn." Rahul looked around. "No, I'm sure we came from this direction. The map said the main road should be close." Mira pulled out the paper map she had drawn earlier, but it didn't help. None of the trees or landmarks matched. The forest looked different, almost unfamiliar. Rahul said, "Maybe we just need to walk a little farther. The road has to be ahead." They kept walking, but the more they moved, the stranger the forest felt. The trees grew thicker, their roots twisted like ropes. The air smelled faintly of smoke, though no fire was visible. The light faded faster than usual, and soon the only sound they heard was the faint crunch of their own footsteps. Then Mira stopped suddenly. "Did you hear that?" Rahul listened carefully. At first he heard nothing, then a soft whisper came from behind a tree. It wasn't clear words, more like a sigh or a breath carried by the wind. Rahul said, Maybe it's the wind passing through the branches, but Mira shook her head. That sound came from close by. It sounded like someone whispering. Rahul shined his flashlight toward the trees. The light hit the bark, the leaves, and the empty air between them. Nothing moved. Yet the whisper came again, this time from the other side. Mira gripped her backpack strap tightly. Rahul, we should go back the way we came. He nodded and they turned around, but when they tried to retrace their steps, the trail behind them had changed. The path that had been clear a few minutes ago now seemed covered in thick branches and leaves, as if it had never existed. Rahul felt a cold shiver down his spine. This doesn't make sense. We didn't walk that far. Mira said softly. It's like the forest doesn't want us to leave. They kept walking in what they hoped was the right direction. After some time, they saw something through the trees and a faint light flickering. Rahul's first thought was that it could be a cabin or a campfire. He turned to Mira. Someone might be there. Maybe they can help us find the way out. Mira hesitated but followed. As they moved closer, the light grew brighter. It wasn't a fire, but a small lantern hanging on a pole. Beneath it stood an old wooden cart with a painted sign on the side. The letters were faded, but Mira could still read them. It said, "Popcorn and candy, Woodland Circus." Rahul stepped closer. The cart wheels were half buried in the ground and a few paper bags lay scattered nearby. One still had a faint smell of sugar. Mira bent down and picked up a small bell that had fallen beside the cart. It was rusted but still shiny enough to reflect the lantern light. She whispered, "This means someone was here. Maybe not long ago." Rahul examined the lantern. It was lit with a small candle still burning. This candle can't have been burning for long. Someone must have lit it recently. They both looked around. The forest was quiet and the shadows stretched long around them. Rahul turned off his flashlight for a moment. The lantern light flickered on the trees, casting shapes that almost looked like people standing in the dark. Mira took a step back. "Rahul, I don't like this. We should leave." He nodded, but before they could move, they heard another sound, a soft squeak like the wheels of something moving slowly. It came from behind the trees, growing a little louder with each second. Rahul lifted the lantern from the pole and held it up. Through the dim light, they saw a small wagon rolling toward them on its own. It was red and gold, the kind that might carry performers or equipment. Its paint was peeling and its door was slightly open, moving as it rolled. There was no one pulling it. Mira's breath caught. "How is it moving?" Rahul's voice was low. "Maybe it's rolling downhill." But the ground was flat. The wagon came to a stop just a few feet away from them. The door creaked open, and inside they saw a row of folded costumes hanging from a rack. The fabric was old but bright, covered in glitter and ribbons. Rahul reached inside and lifted one of them. It was a small red jacket, the kind worn by a circus ringmaster. Inside the pocket there was a folded piece of paper. He opened it carefully. The paper had writing in neat cursive letters. It read, "The show never ends." Mira stepped back, her eyes wide. "Rahul, we need to leave now." He nodded quickly and dropped the note. They turned and ran through the trees, not caring which way they went. Branches scratched their arms and their breaths came fast. The forest seemed alive around them, the sound of whispers following their steps. After a few minutes, they reached a clearing. The moonlight shone down, revealing the same striped tent they had seen earlier. It stood silently, looking exactly as it had before. Rahul stopped in disbelief. "We came back to the circus," Mira's voice trembled. "That's impossible." We were walking away from it. The entrance of the tent was open again and faint music began to play inside. It was the same slow, broken tune they had heard earlier. Rahul whispered, "It's like it's calling us," Mira said. "No, we're leaving." She grabbed his hand and tried to pull him back, but Rahul couldn't take his eyes off the tent. There was a flicker of light inside, like torches moving around. "Maybe someone's there," he said quietly. "If we find them, we can ask for help. They might know the way out." Mira shook her head, but Rahul was already walking toward the entrance. The closer he got, the clearer the music became. It was not coming from a speaker or any instrument. It sounded almost like it was being played by unseen hands. He stopped at the entrance and looked inside. The chairs were still there, the stage still empty. But now faint shadows moved across the ring, shaped like people performing. He could see the outline of a juggler, a dancer, and a tall figure in a hat standing in the middle. Mira stayed a few steps behind him, whispering, What do you see? Rahul didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the center of the ring, where the tall figure slowly turned to face him. The lantern light flickered, and for a moment Rahul thought the figure smiled. Then the music stopped again. The tent went silent. Mira grabbed Rahul's arm. "We have to go now," he nodded, finally breaking his gaze. They turned and ran out of the clearing, deeper into the forest once more, not knowing if they were heading towards safety or deeper into the secret of the hidden circus. Rahul and Mira ran through the forest until their legs ached. The cold night air stung their faces and the trees seemed endless. The moonlight guided them just enough to avoid tripping, but every shadow looked like a figure waiting to move. They finally stopped near a stream and tried to catch their breath. The water flowed quietly, and for the first time since leaving the circus they heard something normal. Rahul knelt by the stream and splashed water on his face. Mira sat on a rock, hugging her knees, trying to calm down. "Rahul," she said softly, "we're going in circles. I'm sure we passed that circus twice now. What if we can't leave this forest?" Rahul looked at her with tired eyes. "We will. We just need to keep our heads clear. There must be a way out. Forests can be confusing at night. We might be walking in the wrong direction." Mira nodded weakly. "Then we should wait for daylight. Maybe we can see the road from a high spot," Rahul agreed. "We'll rest for a while, then move when the sun comes up." They found a small patch of dry ground near a fallen tree and sat there. The forest was quiet again. No whispers, no circus music, no movement. The silence gave them a small sense of relief. Rahul took out a sandwich from his bag, but he could hardly eat. Mira leaned against the trunk, closing her eyes for a moment. Just when Rahul started to relax, he noticed something strange across the stream. A small light blinked between the trees like a lantern moving slowly. He frowned and pointed toward it. "Do you see that?" he asked. Mira opened her eyes and followed his gaze. "Maybe it's a camper or another hiker." Rahul stood up. "If it's a person, maybe they can help us." Mira hesitated. "Or it could be something from that circus again." Rahul looked uncertain. "It's better to check. We can't stay lost all night." They crossed the stream carefully, stepping on the stones. As they got closer, the light stopped moving. It stayed still, shining softly through the fog that had begun to rise. Rahul lifted his flashlight and called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" There was no reply. The light flickered once, then dimmed. They walked closer until they reached a small clearing. In the middle of it stood an old wagon. It looked like one used by traveling performers. The wooden door was open and the lantern hung from a hook beside it. Mira whispered, "It looks like another circus wagon." Rahul nodded slowly. "Maybe it's connected to that tent. But why are there so many things spread across the forest?" He climbed the short steps and peeked inside. The wagon was filled with dusty boxes, faded posters, and pieces of costumes. On one shelf, he found a small journal covered in dirt. He opened it and saw neat handwriting across the yellow pages. The first line said, "Property of the Woodland Circus." He turned the pages carefully. Most of them were lists of shows and performers' names. But one page made him pause. It read, "The forest chose us. Once the curtain fell, we could not leave. The show must go on." Rahul felt his chest tighten. "Mira, come look at this." She climbed up beside him and read the words. "What does that mean? Who wrote it?" "I don't know," Rahul said. "But it sounds like the people who worked here were trapped." Mira looked around nervously. "Rahul, let's put it back and leave. This place doesn't feel right." As they turned to go, a faint sound drifted through the trees. It was laughter. At first it was soft and distant, almost like the echo of a memory. Then it grew louder, clearer, and closer. It was not joyful laughter. It sounded strained, like someone forcing themselves to laugh. Mira froze in fear. "That's not normal." "That's coming from behind us." Rahul shone the flashlight toward the trees. The beam moved across trunks and branches but found nothing. Yet the laughter kept echoing, moving around them as if circling the clearing. "Run," Rahul said quickly. They jumped down from the wagon and ran back toward the stream. The laughter followed them, bouncing between the trees. Sometimes it sounded near, sometimes far, but never gone. When they reached the water again, Rahul tripped on a rock and fell hard. The flashlight flew from his hand and rolled into the stream. Mira helped him up. The laughter stopped suddenly. The forest became still once more. Only the soft sound of running water filled the air. Rahul whispered, "It stopped." Mira's eyes searched the shadows. I don't think it's gone. They stood in silence for a minute, then decided to move toward higher ground where they could see the sky better. The hill was steep, covered in fallen leaves, but they climbed slowly, holding onto branches for balance. When they reached the top, they could see the treetops stretching endlessly. The moon hung low, lighting parts of the forest. There's no road, Mira said quietly. It's all trees. Rahul sat on the ground, feeling frustrated. We should have marked our path when we came. Mira sat beside him. I think this forest is changing. It's not staying the same. Rahul looked at her. You mean it's alive? I don't know, Mira said. But places like that circus don't just appear by accident. They sat for a while, trying to plan what to do. Then Rahul noticed something carved into a nearby tree. He walked closer and brushed off the moss. The carving showed a circle with stars around it, the same symbol that had been painted on the circus ticket. Under it were 3 words. The curtain calls. Rahul touched the carving and said, This symbol is everywhere. It's on the ticket, the wagon, and now here, Mira said. Maybe it marks the area of the circus. Everything inside this boundary belongs to it. Rahul stepped back. If that's true, then we're still inside it. A sudden gust of wind moved through the trees and a faint sound came again from below the hill. It was not laughter this time, but music. The same circus tune played once more, soft and distant. Mira stood up quickly. It's starting again. Rahul looked around. We need to move in the opposite direction of the sound. If we go toward it, we'll end up back at that tent. They began walking down the other side of the hill away from the music. The forest grew denser and the path was uneven. Rahul tripped on a root and fell again. But when Mira helped him up, she noticed something on the ground. It was another ticket, fresh and clean, as if printed that day. She picked it up slowly. It looks new. Rahul took it from her hand. How can it be new? The other one was old. On the back of the ticket, words were written in dark ink. 2 guests admitted. Show begins soon. Mira felt cold all over. 2 guests. That means us. Rahul tore the ticket in half and threw it away. No one decides that for us. They kept moving until they reached a line of wooden fences covered in vines. Behind them stood small tents, stalls, and a large wooden gate with a painted sign that said, Performers only. Rahul stared at it in disbelief. This wasn't here before, Mira whispered. It's like the circus is growing. They walked closer and the gate creaked open slightly, as if pushed by an invisible hand. Inside they could see empty stalls with instruments, cages, and chairs. The place looked like a town built for performers who had never left. Rahul took a step forward but stopped when he heard a voice. It was soft and calm, coming from inside the gate. It said, The show is waiting. Mira grabbed his arm. Rahul, please don't go in there. He looked back at her. We have to find out what's going on. Maybe that's the only way to end this. Mira shook her head, tears in her eyes. What if there's no end? Rahul looked at the gate again. The light from the moon made the sign glow faintly. He felt the strange pull of curiosity again, the same one that had led him to the circus in the first place. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. Mira hesitated for a moment, then followed him inside. The gate closed behind them with a soft thud, and the sound of the circus tune began to play once more, louder this time, echoing through the woods as if welcoming its newest performers. When Rahul and Mira stepped through the wooden gate, a strange calmness surrounded them. The air felt different inside, thicker, almost like they had entered another world. Faint light came from hanging lanterns, though no one seemed to be around to light them. The ground was covered in sawdust and wooden stalls lined both sides of a narrow path. Some stalls had old costumes hanging. Others had cages that were now empty. Everything looked untouched but strangely clean, as if someone cared for the place in silence. Mira whispered, This looks like the backstage area of the circus. Maybe the performers used to live here. Rahul nodded, looking at the signs above the stalls. Each one had a name carved into the wood. There was the Amazing Balancer, Luna the Dancer, the Whistling Twins, and many others. He paused in front of one that said, Ringmaster Arlo. The sign was brighter than the others, the letters still golden as if recently polished. Rahul said, This must have been the leader, the ringmaster. They continued walking until they reached a wider space where the stalls formed a circle. In the middle stood a large campfire pit surrounded by benches. There was no fire, but the ashes were fresh and a thin line of smoke still rose from them. Mira said, Someone has been here recently. Rahul looked around. Maybe we should call out. If someone lives here, they might help us. Before Mira could stop him, he called, "Hello, is anyone here?" His voice echoed through the empty stalls. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then a faint sound answered from the distance. It was not a word, but a soft hum like someone singing a tune. The sound grew slowly closer. Mira grabbed Rahul's arm. "Let's not stay here," she whispered. Rahul hesitated but nodded. They turned to go back the way they came, but the gate they had entered through was gone. In its place stood a tall fence of wooden boards that stretched endlessly in both directions. Mira stared in shock. The gate disappeared. Rahul looked at her with fear in his eyes. "We'll find another way. Maybe there's another exit." They walked toward a small path that led deeper into the performers' area. As they moved, they passed more stalls, each one more detailed than the last. One had a mirror covered with dust, another had a wooden box filled with juggling pins. Rahul picked one up, and to his surprise it was warm, as if someone had just used it. He dropped it quickly. Suddenly they heard footsteps behind them. Slow and steady, like someone walking on dry leaves. Mira turned around, shining her flashlight, but no one was there. The footsteps stopped the moment the light moved. "Rahul, we're not alone," she said quietly. He took a deep breath. "I know, but we have to keep moving." They followed the path until they reached a tall wooden door built into a wall of red cloth. The cloth looked like part of the big tent, but stretched much farther than before. The door had a golden handle shaped like a star. Rahul placed his hand on it, and the door opened on its own. Inside was a long corridor filled with dim light. The walls were covered in paintings of circus performers smiling in grand poses. The farther they walked, the older the paintings looked. The smiles on the faces turned faded and the colors darkened. At the end of the hallway, they found another open space. It was a practice area, a large room with ropes hanging from the ceiling, swings and props scattered across the floor. Dust floated in the air, glowing faintly under the lanterns. A big mirror stood on one side, and when Rahul walked closer, he noticed something strange. Their reflection looked normal, but behind them, in the mirror's image, several shadowy figures stood watching. Rahul turned around quickly, but there was nothing. The room was empty. Mira saw the fear in his face. "What did you see?" He pointed at the mirror. "Look behind us in the reflection." She looked, and her eyes widened. In the mirror, the shadows were still there. They were faint but visible, shaped like people wearing circus costumes. One wore a tall hat, another held a hoop, and a third had wings attached to the back. They did not move, but they seemed to be looking directly at them. Mira stepped back. "Let's go, Rahul. Please." They ran out of the practice area and found themselves in another part of the performers' village. Here the tents were smaller, shaped like homes. A few had lights glowing inside. Rahul peeked through one opening and froze. Inside, a figure sat at a table with its back turned toward him. The person wore a red coat and a tall hat. The shoulders moved slowly as if breathing. Rahul whispered, "There's someone in there." Mira pulled him away. "No, we're not talking to anyone. We're leaving." As they stepped back, the door of the tent creaked open by itself. The figure inside slowly turned its head. It was not clear or human-looking. Its face was pale and its eyes were blank. The figure lifted a hand, pointing straight at Rahul and Mira. Rahul grabbed Mira's hand and they ran again, weaving between the tents. The ground seemed to shift under their feet, the path changing direction. The sound of circus music began once more, louder now, filling the air with its haunting melody. They reached another open space. This one looked like a small arena with wooden seats arranged around a central ring. The benches were empty, but every seat had a folded ticket placed neatly on it. Rahul picked one up. The ticket read, "Tonight's performance, the final act." Mira's voice trembled. "I don't want to know what that means." Before Rahul could answer, the lights above the arena flickered on. The ring in the center glowed faintly, and the music changed to a slower rhythm. From the other side of the ring, a curtain opened, and the figure in the red coat stepped out. The tall hat, the white gloves, and the polished shoes made it clear who it was. "The ringmaster," Rahul whispered. The figure stood still for a moment, then bowed slowly as if greeting them. A deep voice echoed across the arena. "Welcome back to the show." Rahul and Mira froze. The voice sounded both kind and cold, as if it came from far away. The ringmaster raised a hand, and at once faint shapes began to appear around the ring. Acrobat figures swung through the air, jugglers tossed invisible balls, and dancers twirled gracefully, all made of shadows and light. Their faces had no features, but their movements were smooth and practiced. Mira grabbed Rahul's arm. "These are not people. They're not real." Rahul watched silently as the ringmaster turned toward them. "Every circus needs an audience," the voice said. "And every story must be performed again." Rahul shook his head. "We're not staying here. We're leaving." The ringmaster tilted his head slightly. "You already joined when you entered the gate. The show remembers those who walk inside." The shadow performers stopped moving. The lights dimmed again and the music faded. Rahul pulled Mira toward the exit, but the path they came from was gone. In its place was another curtain. They ran through it hoping it would lead out, but instead they found themselves in a narrow tunnel. The tunnel walls were covered in circus posters. The same faces repeated over and over, smiling under the bright letters. But as they walked, the faces in the posters began to look more like them. Rahul saw his own face drawn under the title, The Brave Wanderer, and Mira's face under The Fearless Dreamer. Mira covered her mouth in shock. "Why are we on these posters?" Rahul said nothing. He felt a chill run through him. He tore one poster down, but behind it was another identical one. The tunnel seemed endless, and the sound of clapping hands echoed from somewhere ahead. Finally, they reached the end of the tunnel. A wooden door stood there with golden writing that said, "Enter the final act." Rahul turned to Mira. "We can't go back. Maybe this is the way out." She looked terrified. "Or maybe it's the last step of the show." Rahul hesitated, then placed his hand on the door. The moment he pushed it open, bright light flooded the tunnel, blinding them both. They stepped forward together, not knowing what waited on the other side, but certain that the hidden circus still had one more act to show. When Rahul and Mira stepped through the glowing door, they found themselves standing inside the grand circus tent again. But this time it was not empty. The benches were full. Hundreds of figures sat watching them. None of the faces were clear, only outlines that looked like people made of faint smoke and dim light. The entire tent was lit by golden lamps hanging from above, and the air smelled of sweet popcorn and sawdust. Rahul felt his heart pounding. Mira held his hand tightly. In the middle of the ring stood the ringmaster, tall and still, with his red coat shining under the lamps. He smiled in silence before lifting his hat and bowing to the crowd. The shadow audience clapped softly, the sound echoing all around them. The ringmaster spoke in a calm, deep voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we welcome two new guests to our stage. Two travelers who found the circus that time forgot." Rahul shook his head. "We're not part of this. We just want to go home." The ringmaster turned to him. "Every performer says the same before the curtain rises. But the show must go on." With a wave of his hand, the ground beneath Rahul and Mira began to change. The sand turned red and gold, and the lights focused on them. Behind them, the curtains opened to reveal props and equipment. A tightrope stretched high across the tent. A large hoop appeared, glowing faintly. Mira whispered, "He wants us to perform." Rahul said, "We can't do that. We don't even know how." The ringmaster smiled wider. "The circus remembers. Those who enter learn what the show needs." Suddenly, Rahul felt a strange pull inside him. His body moved without his choice. His feet stepped onto the first rung of a ladder that led up to the tightrope. Mira tried to stop him, but her hands trembled. She felt the same pull drawing her toward the glowing hoop. "Rahul, I can't move," she said in fear. He struggled to stop himself, but couldn't. The higher he climbed, the clearer everything became. The tightrope stretched endlessly above him, but his body balanced perfectly. He looked down and saw Mira below, standing near the hoop that now floated in midair. The ringmaster's voice filled the tent. "The Wanderer and the Dreamer. Their story begins." The crowd clapped again, and the sound became louder, almost like thunder. Rahul walked across the tightrope, his steps sure and steady, though he didn't understand how. Mira jumped through the hoop, landing gracefully, her movements smooth and balanced. They were performing, yet their minds screamed to stop. As they moved, the images of the shadow audience began to change. The smoky outlines turned into faces of past performers. Rahul saw them clearly now. Some wore costumes of clowns, dancers, jugglers, and acrobats. They smiled and clapped, cheering for him and Mira, but their eyes were hollow and glowing faintly white. Rahul realized these were the lost performers. The circus had kept them trapped forever as part of the show. He called out to Mira, "We have to break it. We can't let it take us." Mira nodded but kept moving through the hoops, her body acting on its own. Then she noticed something behind the ringmaster. A large wooden chest stood half open, light shining from inside. The same chest she had seen in the fortune-teller's tent earlier. "Rahul, the chest," she shouted. "That's where the light is coming from." Rahul looked down and saw it too. The glow inside the chest was strong, almost alive. The ringmaster noticed their attention and turned sharply toward them. His smile faded and his voice grew colder. "You cannot break what the circus has chosen." Rahul ignored him. He climbed down the ladder quickly. Mira ran to the chest, but the ringmaster raised his hand and ropes came alive around her feet, wrapping tightly. Rahul reached her side, pulling at the ropes, but they tightened more. The ringmaster walked closer, each step echoing on the floor. "You came searching for wonder. You found it. Now you belong to it." Rahul took a deep breath. "No, we didn't come to stay." He looked at the chest. The light inside pulsed like a heartbeat. He reached toward it. The moment his hand touched the edge, a strong wind blew through the tent. The audience of shadows began to fade, their shapes twisting and disappearing. The lanterns flickered wildly. The ringmaster shouted, "Stop! You will break the show." Rahul ignored him and pulled the lid open fully. A burst of golden light filled the entire tent. The ropes holding Mira vanished, freeing her. The wind became stronger, almost lifting them from the ground. The sound of the circus music returned, but now it was softer, slower and peaceful. Inside the chest, Rahul saw something unexpected. It was not treasure or magic tools. It was a simple book with a red cover. On it were written the words, "The Eternal Performance." Rahul picked up the book. The pages flipped on their own, showing names and drawings of the circus performers. Every page carried a story, a date, and a name written below it. The last page was blank, waiting for new names. Rahul looked at Mira. "This book keeps them here. If we end the story, maybe we can free them all." Mira nodded quickly. "Then do it." Rahul took a piece of chalk lying near the chest. He wrote on the last page, "The wanderer and the dreamer walked out of the circus and never looked back." As soon as he finished, the golden light rose from the book and spread across the tent. The ringmaster screamed, not in pain but in sorrow. His red coat began to fade, and his tall hat fell to the ground. The shadow audience turned into dust that floated upward like mist. The tent shook as the sound of clapping hands turned into whispers. Rahul and Mira held each other tightly as everything around them began to disappear. The lights went out one by one. The floor under their feet turned to dust. The last thing they saw was the book closing by itself and the words on the cover changing to "The Circus That Ended." Then there was silence. When Rahul opened his eyes again, he found himself lying on the forest ground. Sunlight filtered through the trees and birds chirped softly. Mira sat beside him holding his hand. The circus was gone. There were no tents, no lights, no sounds. Only the quiet woods remained. Mira looked around. "Are we really out?" Rahul nodded slowly. "I think we are. It's over." They stood up and began walking back toward the trail. The forest looked normal again. The smell of old smoke and sawdust had vanished. Yet as they walked, they both felt that something unseen was still watching. When they reached the old wooden sign near the hiking trail, they stopped. The letters had changed. It no longer said Old Creek Path. Now it read Circus Rest Point. Rahul stared at it quietly. "Do you see that?" Mira nodded. "It means the circus was real." They walked a little farther until they reached their car. As Mira opened the door, she froze. On the car's seat lay a small folded paper. Rahul picked it up and opened it. Inside was a circus ticket, clean and new with their names written on it. At the bottom it said, "Thank you for the final act." They looked at each other in silence. Mira placed the ticket in her pocket. "Let's just go home," Rahul nodded. He started the car and they drove away slowly. In the mirror he saw the forest behind them. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a figure in a red coat standing among the trees watching them leave. But when he looked again, it was gone. The road stretched ahead, bright and calm under the morning sun. They never spoke of the circus again. But sometimes, when the wind blew through the woods near their town, they could faintly hear the sound of distant clapping and the echo of a voice saying, "The show must go on." And deep in the forest, under the shade of tall trees, a single red hat lay half buried in the soil, waiting for the next curious traveler who might find the hidden circus once more.